Optimism has returned to Canada's capital. The Ottawa Senators have had one of the most active off seasons of any team. Ross Levitan of Locked On Senators is here to discuss it and why all Senators fans are eagerly looking forward to the 2022-2023 season. All that and more coming up on this episode of the Locked On NHL podcast.
You're Locked On NHL, your daily podcast on the National Hockey League. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And hello, everybody, and welcome to the Monday edition of the Locked On NHL podcast. Gil Martin, so glad I could be with you today. And thank you for making Locked On NHL your first listen every day. We are free and available on all platforms. Today's episode is brought to you by BetOnline. BetOnline has you covered this season with more props, odds, and lines than ever before. BetOnline, where the game starts. It is my pleasure to welcome back to the show the co-host of Locked On Senators, Ross Levitan. And Ross, the hunger, the optimism, the excitement is back in Ottawa. What an offseason it has been for this Senators team.
Oh, it's been so much fun, Gil, and thanks for having me because, every Tuesday I host the Locked On NHL show with Mike DiStefano from Locked On Leafs, and he doesn't want to hear me wax poetically about the offseason for the Ottawa Senators, especially when they were able to ship off their much injured goaltender, I'll put it to be nice, in Matt Murray to the Toronto Maple Leafs on the other side of the Battle of Ontario. But you're right. Optimism is the key word because they haven't accomplished anything yet. You can't win the Stanley Cup in the offseason, but you can certainly set yourself up to be better than you were before. I was just searching up, and from the start of the 2017 season, so right after they made that double overtime Game 7 in the conference final, there are two teams with a worse winning percentage than the Ottawa Senators. They're the Detroit Red Wings and the Seattle Kraken, an expansion team who's played 1 year in the league. So to say that it's been tough times around Ottawa is an understatement, but they certainly flipped the script, and they did it in a variety of ways, not only showing that they're willing to spend money, showing that they're able to attract a top free agent to come to town, and then showing that they're good at re-upping their own in re-signing Josh Norris as well. So they were busy, and then on the cherry on top, and we're a hashtag goalie-friendly show at Locked On Senators, they go out there and say, you know what? Anton Forsberg, you were great for us last year. You know what? You earned that 3-year extension. You were awesome. But we've got this guy, Filip Gustavsson, here. He's on a one-way next year. He's 24 years old. He had a great end of the COVID-shortened season, but last year, not great. Not great. And he'd probably tell you the same thing. Now, do I think he's going to bounce back and long-term be good? Yes. But next year, to show, again, a guy like Claude Giroux before he signed, they're like, no, we need a veteran. So they go out there and get Cam Talbot, 1-for-1 trade with the Wild with Filip Gustavsson. A trade I think is going to work out for both teams, but immediately that just adds that extra layer of credibility around the league that the rebuild is over. I know Pierre Dorion said that probably a year too early when he was out in the media and he was torched for it. But if you see any of these videos, Gil, and just go over to the @Senators social media account on Twitter or Instagram, they've been posting these behind the scenes videos of Giroux coming in and checking out the CTC for the first time. Same with Debrincat, and like the joy in Pierre Dorion's voice is palpable. You can honestly just feel a 1,000-pound weight being lifted off his shoulders because he's an Ottawa guy. He's a proud local citizen, and his name has just been dragged through the mud over these last 5 years. And now you can actually see on paper this team, and I'm not saying they're Stanley Cup favorite, but this team finally has a legitimate direction going the right way. And it's super exciting to see because a lot of the fans they felt kind of alienated over the last few years, whether it was something that the owner said or the way that name your favorite player. Yeah, he's traded type thing. Like the Carlsons, the Stones, the Duchesnes, the Hoffmans, like the list goes on and on and on, the Turrises and on. It really feels like the new era is here and that it's going to be set up for success for a long period of time.
It's always tough for fans when they invest emotionally in a player and then that player is gone time after time after time. Out of all the moves that this team has made, which one for you was the most important that sort of changed the picture the most?
Yeah, it's got to be Alex Debrincat. Like, you bring in a 2-time 40 goal scorer. And not only that, he's 24 years old. And you could just tell from the reaction of Jack Bushman over at Locked On Blackhawks and all their fans, like, what were they doing? Even if you're going to rebuild, this seems like the type of guy that you rebuild around. Like, what's the average rebuild? 4 years? He'll be 28 years old. He'll be still in his prime. So it just felt like a really strange dynamic. I know he's got 1 year left on his deal, still an RFA for 1 more year. And yes, that $9 million salary is a lot, but this guy is a sniper. People said he was carried in junior because his first year with the Erie Otters, he played with Connor McDavid. Don't know if you heard of him. Pretty good hockey player.
I've heard of him, man.
You know what he did the next couple of years? Put up even better numbers without him. But it was still, it just felt so strange because obviously he's an undersized guy, right? And so you're looking at, I'm just pulling up his last year. So after his second season, 51 goals, 101 points in 60 games. And that's without Connor McDavid. He had already been drafted first overall and turned pro. How does a guy with 51 goals in 60 games go 39th overall in the draft? So still had his doubters. In his third year in junior, he had 65 goals in 63 games. So again, showing that he can do it without the help of, you name your all-star here. And then now we're hearing the same thing because he played primarily with Patrick Kane over the last few seasons in Chicago. And don't get me wrong, if you watch the Alex Debrincat highlight reel skill, there's a lot of number 88 making some nice feeds in it. But I think to be a good player, you have to be able to play with good players, and his hockey IQ is off the charts. And the Senators have their top line. Maybe it becomes their second line, depending on how Debrincat fits in, but they have one line locked in stone, and that's Josh Norris with Brady Tkachuk and Drake Batherson. They were dangerous even last year when they didn't have any secondary scoring. But then they've got this third overall pick, Tim Stützle, who really came into his own, point per game player after the new year from January on last season, moved over to center, still young. He's a playmaker, though. Who does he need? A guy to get the puck to. And I think the generous scouting reports in his draft said he's got a bit of Patrick Kane in him. A little Patrick Kane, a little Matthew Barzal as well to kind of put an Islander spin. But like that shifty playmaker but needs a guy to come in here and finish. And he was playing with Adam Gaudette and Alex Formenton at times this year. And don't get me wrong, I love especially Formenton, good energy, third-line player. But to get a guy like Alex Debrincat, you elevate not only himself, but you elevate his line mates, and kind of going hand in hand. You don't get Claude Giroux, I don't think, unless you make that trade for Alex Debrincat, because that showed him as a pending free agent. Like, yeah, it's nice to come home, and we spoke about how good that story is when we talked on Wednesday, but now he's like, okay, I'm not going there for a retirement home. I'm going there to help legitimize this top six. And I assume he'll start on the right side. And what's beautiful about Claude Giroux is that he's a 60% faceoff guy. Tim Stützle really suffered in the dot last year. We know young guys do, but I think he was like 30%. So you can have Giroux take those important faceoffs in the offensive zone and then just switch during the play so that Stützle's playing down the middle where he can facilitate a bit better. But long-windedly, to answer your question, it's Alex Debrincat because it was the first move. It also didn't cost them anything off their roster. Yeah, some high draft picks, but nothing off their roster, no prospects. It just felt like an absolute home run and took the pressure off Dorion, and everything else is just kind of built off of that success.
What briefly do the Senators need to do from here to get ready for this season and shore things up?
Yeah, they still need to work on the back end. Like I mentioned off the top, Cam Talbot, great acquisition to be a 1A guy. I don't think at this point in his career, at 35 years old, he's going to play 60 games. You know, he played like 68 games 1 year in Edmonton. Like, you're not going to be doing that at 35 years old. But if he can come in and carry the mail for 50, 55 games, maybe, I think that would be enough. Up front, we just talked about their top six, and then they got a couple of young guys, Shane Pinto, Ridley Gregg coming up. So I think there is going to be that second wave behind that legitimate top six that can come in and give them secondary scoring. But on defense, Pierre Dorion has made no secret. He's looking for a right side D. The names that have been thrown out there, Jacob Chychrun, we know that Arizona's holding out with a pretty steep price. And why wouldn't they? 3 years left on that deal, $4.6 million AAV. That's a great contract anyway you slice it. Mackenzie Weegar, another local kid, he's got 1 year left, but you're like, hey, why would Florida move him? Even though there's 1 year left, aren't they contending? Shouldn't they have him as a piece of that? So I'm a little confused about what's going to have to go out to bring back in. John Klingberg would be the free option, at least asset-wise, because he's the UFA. But I don't know which way they're going to go. John Marino was a name that was thrown out, but obviously he's already changed zip codes, now heading to New Jersey. So to me, it's a right side defenseman. And then Mathieu Joseph, acquired in the Nick Paul trade at the trade deadline, he just filed for arbitration today. So they can still negotiate between now and then. But if that goes to arbitration, a second buyout period opens. And I would be curious to see if Nikita Zaitsev isn't on that list. I think the Sens believe they could trade him now that his bonus was paid out this year. But he is not only an anchor on the ice to whoever he's playing with, but that contract is also really showing to be tough to move. So the back end needs a bit of massaging, and then the optimism will probably need to be reined in. But right now, yeah, I'd say the forwards and goaltending, I'm confident going into the season that this could be a playoff team. But right now, the decor still needs a little bit more work.
All right, Ross, why don't you tell our viewers and our listeners where they could find you, where they could find the podcast?
Yeah, for sure. Well, we always appreciate everyone on YouTube as well. Locked On NHL is on its way to 1,000 subscribers. It's going to be awesome when we get to hit that. But Locked On Senators, you can find right there. Anywhere you get audio podcasts as well. We like to mix it up a little bit on Twitter too. You can follow us there at Sens Central. And yeah, it's really feeling like the page is being turned in Ottawa, which is great to see. Like, I think unless you're a Toronto or a Montreal fan, you want to see hockey succeed everywhere in Canada. And there's been some lean years, right? Especially in Ontario. The last playoff series win in Ontario was in 2017. Don't have to tell you who it is. We could keep going back till 2004 until that had to change sides. But no, in all seriousness, it's just fun that there's enthusiasm around this team now. So we're trying to kind of be a voice for the fan base from that aspect and reflect that in the excitement that we have surrounding the team.
Sounds good. Ross, I know you guys will have it all covered at Sens Central. Thanks so much for joining us today.
Appreciate it, man. And hopefully Lou gives you guys something to talk about here one of these days. Hey, with the Islanders, he'll hold out, but he'll get you a little something, I bet.
I think so too. All right. Thanks, Ross. Today's episode is brought to you by your friends at BetOnline. BetOnline.net is your number one source for all your betting needs and sports info. Find all the latest sports developments, league reviews, and news, including Major League Baseball. And you've got futures on the NBA, the NFL, and the NHL as well. BetOnline is your continued source for all your sports wagering information, including live betting, esports, and more. And BetOnline.net remains the best spot for all your sports scores, podcasts, and news this season. BetOnline.net is the fastest and easiest way to check on all your favorite sports and events, including MMA, boxing, tennis, and golf. Head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more about the trends in action. BetOnline, where the game starts.